And then what? You bleed, and then what do you have? It's a disease. It does. Hemophilia. Hemophilia. One of the most common forms of hemophilia is missing clotting factor number 8. And if you are missing clotting factor number 8, or one of the clotting factors, you can have one of two choices. Either you take the replacement every day, and I don't know if it's an injection or I would guess it's probably an injection, but you take the replacement every day, and if you have the replacement floating around in your bloodstream, you'll clot. Your other option is to not take it every day, because I'm sure it's expensive. And if you don't take it every day, and then you cut yourself, then you get to run as fast as you can to the ER and get in a big injection so that you can help clot, that way. I had a student once, we were talking about this, and she says, yeah, my boyfriend has factor 8 hemophilia. And I said, does he take the factor every day? She said, no, but whenever he has any kind of an injury, he literally has to get as fast as he can to the ER so that they'll give him an injection so he can clot. Otherwise, he can bleed out. And we only have 5 to 6 liters of blood. We talked about that, right? 5 to 6 liters of blood in our body. 5 to 6 liters, a gallon and a half. I know we talked about it in anatomy. Gallon and a half, that's not very much. So if you're gonna bleed out because of an injury because you can't clot, it doesn't take long before you're in trouble.
And is this with like any cut, even if it's super superficial?
Anything, you can't stop. I mean, it'll take longer if it's a smaller one versus a bigger one, but you can't clot. It just continues to bleed.
Wasn't hemophilia considered like the royal blood disease at one point?
Yeah, because it was prevalent in one of the, I think it was England, one of the families. Hemophilia, especially factor 8 hemophilia, is X-linked. So it's more common in men. Same reason for color blindness, right? It's on the X chromosome. So if a guy has the bad gene and a Y chromosome, he's going to express the bad gene. A female who has the bad gene can have another X that overrides it and doesn't have the disease. But when she gets married, if she passes on the X to her son, then sons have it, right? And, it increases your chances of death because you can't clot. Components important for clotting. Vitamin K. Vitamin K is a vitamin that we need to have in our diet. It's important for making some of the clotting factors. The liver makes most of these proteins for clotting. Prothrombin is another important molecule involved in clotting. And when you get into, that's an important, something they look at for clotting issues in a blood draw. If your prothrombin is low, or they call it a prothrombin time is low, then you've got some clotting issues. Hemophilia A, that's your most common type of hemophilia, that's factor 8. There's another one that's associated with a different disease, but it's not. Oh, it's got to be on chromosome A or the X chromosome as well. Hemophilia B is bad, number 9. It's as the factor 9. Oh, Christmas disease. That's an interesting name. Things that are anticoagulants. So if you've had strokes, if you've had coronary artery disease, your doctor may put you on a low dose aspirin, right? You've heard people taking baby aspirins. Because aspirin reduces clotting. So if you've had strokes because you've got plaque buildup in your arteries, you're gonna have a greater chance of clotting because those plaques break and result in clots. So you may take aspirin. People who have had strokes may also have to take a blood thinner like Coumadin, or Coumarin, which is another name for that. And what that does is it blocks vitamin K. Vitamin K is important for clotting. Heparin is another one that blocks thrombin, which is one of our clotting proteins, and citrate. So, this is going to be a quick review of the heart. For those of you who have not had anatomy, this is going to be a quick introduction of the heart. So remember that the heart has 4 chambers. You've got 2 upper chambers and 2 lower chambers. The upper chambers are called atria, or you have a right atrium, a left atrium, and then the lower chambers are ventricles. You got one on the right side, you got one on the left side. Deoxygenated blood. Remember, veins carry deoxygenated blood, arteries carry oxygenated blood. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. The only exceptions to that rule are the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins. So every other artery is oxygenated. Every other vein is deoxygenated except for those that are directly coming from the right, or the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. So remember, we've got deoxygenated blood coming from the body. Oxygen was sent to the tissues. We took the oxygen to undergo cellular respiration and make the ATP so we can stay alive. And then all that deoxygenated blood needs to come back to the heart and back to the lungs to pick up more oxygen. So our deoxygenated blood, that hemoglobin, dumps off the oxygen to the tissues. It actually picks up some CO2, replaces the oxygen with CO2, because CO2 is a waste product of cellular respiration. We take those red blood cells, we bring them to the heart, we send them to the lungs. Those red blood cells jump off that CO2, so we breathe CO2 out, and then we breathe oxygen in, and we exchange it, right? So in your red blood cell, we've got our hemoglobin. How many irons or how many oxygens can we hold? Up to 4, connected to our iron. So we go to the lungs, we pick up oxygen. We head to the cells, we release the oxygen. Not all of it, some of it. And then we replace that with CO2. Then this is now deoxygenated blood. It's not unoxygenated. It doesn't have 0 oxygen. It's deoxygenated. This then goes back up to the lung, where we're going to get rid of the CO2 and breathe it out and replace it with oxygen and start the whole process again. Dump it to the tissues, exchange it for CO2, take it to the lungs, breathe it out, exchange it for oxygen, blah, blah, blah. So deoxygenated blood comes from the upper part of the body and the lower part of the body through the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium, heads through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle, out the pulmonary valve to the pulmonary trunk to the lungs, where we're going to get rid of the CO2, exchange it for oxygen. Now we're going to come back to the left side of the heart into the left atrium, through the mitral valve to the left ventricle, out the aortic valve to the aorta. This is now oxygenated, and the aorta is going to send that oxygenated blood to all over the body, dumping off the oxygen, picking up CO2, and playing the game all over again. Come to the right side, heading to the lungs, exchanging the CO2 for oxygen. Now we're oxygenated. come to the left side, out to the body, get rid of the CO2, get rid of the oxygen, pick up CO2, head back to the heart, and on we go all day long. Do not worry about the anatomy. I'm not even going to talk about papillary muscles or any of that stuff, or even the pericardium. We do know that the heart is made up of cardiac muscle, which we will talk about next week. I guess I better do this too. The very first two vessels off the aorta are known as the coronary arteries. So when the left ventricle is full of oxygenated blood, it heads out the aorta, and the very first two arteries come off the aorta and head right back to the heart to dump off oxygen at the heart. Then that deoxygenates so that the heart can use oxygen and contract and stay alive and make ATP, because muscle contraction is
ATP expensive.
energy expensive. And if you don't think the heart uses a lot of ATP, oh man, it's working all the time, right? So we're going to send oxygen to the heart cells. All of these cells, these thick cells of the ventricles and the atria, need oxygen so they can contract. And then there will be a venous system that's going to dump that deoxygenated blood back into the right atrium, and that's going to flow and do the same thing as the rest of the body. So the very first two vessels coming off the aorta are your coronary arteries. One goes off to the right side, called the right coronary artery. This is going to branch and feed most of the right side of the heart. The left coronary artery is back here, it's behind this vessel. And it's going to branch. One's going to go to the back side, called the circumflex, and one's going to go to the front and branch and actually feed with the front of the left side of the heart and part of the front of the right side of the heart. Anybody remember what this one was called?
Widowmaker.
The widowmaker, right. The widowmaker, because you get a big old clot in your widowmaker, and all the branching that's feeding is dead. And if your ventricles can't pump, you can't send oxygen to the cells, they can't undergo cellular respiration, can't make ATP. So, we got blockages, we got a couple of things we can do. We can do a bypass, whereupon we'll either take a vessel that's already connected and go and connect it to right beyond the blockage, or if there's a blockage over here, you may take a vein from the leg and connect it to the aorta, and then connect it beyond the blockage. And all you're doing is you're not doing anything to the blockage, you're just rerouting the blood. Instead of through the vessel here, you're rerouting it another way. So fancy word for a bypass is called a CABG. CABG for coronary artery bypass graft. The other thing they can do is put a stent in, or they'll go in with a tube through your femoral artery or your radial artery, and they will expand where the blockage is and put a coil in there to keep the vessel open. That's a stent. Either way, we gotta have blood flow beyond that blockage, or the cells are gonna die. All right, I'll quit there because I don't have any more time.